Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this next episode of Real Siblings It Ain't Easy. This podcast is altogether unconventional, unique, unusual, and seriously, it just ain't typical. I'm Eric, she's Donna, and for those of you who are watching, you can see there's a third person. Two of us are professional real estate agents, and one is a very special guest that we have today. This podcast blends lifestyle and real estate. We work to communicate, educate, connect, and entertain our listeners. While the topics always vary and conversations go in a lot of different directions, remember, we endeavor to provide our listeners with insights into the industry, better equipping them for their next real estate transaction. And Donna?
All right. So hi, everybody. So today we have a special guest. Her name is Reverend Dr. Evy McDonald. She's kind of in the dark. So you're just going to want to listen to this and maybe not watch because it's hard.
You don't project like that. That's just a lighting issue.
I know. Well, okay. I wasn't saying anything about she as a person. So Evy is a friend of mine that I met in Tucson, and I was trying to remember how long ago, Ev, like because COVID years just went by. So I'm like 8 years. I don't know how many years ago. And Evy was working at the church that I attended, St. Mark's. And I took an Advent class, and we were at Barnes and Noble, right? Yep.
Yes.
And since then, our friendship has grown and developed, and we have been in a Bible study, a group with other retired pastors and things on Monday nights, and a Tuesday morning book club. And Evy is smart. She's kind most of the time. She's super witty. She's very sarcastic. She is, I just have to be real.
I'm biting my tongue.
Yeah, you're gonna. And part of what I have learned from her is not related to the things that we've already talked about, but it's related to getting to know someone who has lived most of her life with a disability. And I'm not even sure of the right words anymore to say related to things. But Evy, welcome. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Why don't you tell everybody, tell everybody where you were born and maybe a couple places you lived, because I don't know if we have time for all the places, but what?
I was born in Ogallala, Nebraska.
Yeah.
And those of you who are not really familiar with the US, that's almost in the middle of it. And I've lived in Nebraska, Iowa, Washington State, New York State, Arizona, and maybe a couple of other places in there.
Yeah, she really has traveled a lot.
And is Nebraska home? Will that Nebraska always be home, or did you? Okay.
Yeah. Nebraska's home.
So Evy, Eric and I have been doing these podcasts, and some of them are about the houses, and some of them are about the lifestyle. And as such, I have learned and seen a little about how you live. And so why don't you maybe tell our listeners a little about how you modify, I'm going to say your kitchen. And I know it may be everywhere, but to me, the kitchen is the most obvious. When you move into a place, because we've sold a couple and you've bought a couple, what are some things that you do to modify your kitchen?
So I think probably one of the major things that I do is I put in pull-out drawers on anything that's down low, so that all the cupboards, every shelf has a drawer that pulls out, so that I don't have to try to get down and get in there. But I also put all of my major stuff down. So my dishes are below the sink or to the right of the sink in a pull-out drawer. My pots and pans are in pull-out drawers. My glasses are generally on the first shelf. I ignore those top two shelves in every cupboard because it's not just my disability, but I'm also too short. I'm only 5 feet tall.
Yeah.
And
that doesn't show on screen at all.
I'll put a spice rack in that pulls out and comes down, so that I just have to touch it and it's down more to where I cook, because I love to cook.
Yeah.
So those are some of the modifications that I make. I also, when I was buying a home, my first place that I bought in Tucson, the realtor said, "You realize, don't you, that these counters are 2 inches lower than they should be?" And my mom and I are both short, and we said, "No, they're right where they should be." So that was a boon, and something to kind of think about is counter heights most of the time are made for people who are 5'6" and above. And now a lot of the world is not 5'6" and above,
Yeah.
and a lot of it is. It's easier to raise a counter height with putting something on top of it than it is to try to lower a counter height.
Good point.
So,
Wow. And
Okay, so
go ahead, Eric.
so I want to, before, to our listeners, before we go too much further, yes, we're talking about disabilities and lifestyle and how that impacts people. Those of you who've been a listener, you know I'm an instructor with the San Antonio Board of Realtors Realtor Academy. I teach pre-licensing classes, and part of that, we discuss protected classes for race, gender, family orientation. And the last protected class was Americans with disabilities. And despite that, the single largest group that is still discriminated against are those people with disabilities. And that is what led to this conversation and Donna reaching out to Evy and Evy deciding to join us. So we're a little bit late in getting to what we're actually talking about, but that's
No, Eric, I think that's important. And having now worked with Evy in a couple of different sales and what she looks for and where she just most recently moved, to be able to take an elevator, right? She has, why don't you tell everybody where you moved just now, Evy, and kind of the why of the choosing that.
sure. So I moved into a 55 plus retirement community that is like most retirement communities, only it's apartments instead of small homes. And I did that because my house with its huge yard was getting too much for me to handle and upkeep. And I just didn't want to take 2 to 3 hours of time to water the yard. And in Arizona, you got to do that a lot, and a couple of other things. But it was important to me that some silly things were important. An elevator was important because it had third floors, and believe it or not every even 55 plus community that has a high rise has all the elevators that are needed. I also wanted it for my own enjoyment to face my mountain, which is on the west side of Tucson, so that I had a mountain view and I had good sunlight. And I needed to be able to know that I could modify it the way that I needed it to be, with the shelves, with bars in the bathroom, with things that they had not done, even though it was a 55 plus community, that would have seemed routine to me, but that they would allow me to do that. And they kind of said, of course. One innovative thing that I did that I wondered why I waited so long to do it was the rack for my clothes was too high for me because I've lost some of my upper arm strength, so I can't raise up very far. And they said what it was going to cost to lower the rack by 4 inches. So all I did was go get a sturdy shower rod with 2 S hooks that were 4 inches in length and hang that and lower my clothes rack. Simple, inexpensive way to modify.
That's brilliant, Ev. That's really neat. So one of the other things that you and I have talked about through the years is that you have worked with a lot of churches and talked to, okay, and you and I, because we go out together and I've had knee replacements and we both have needed, the handicap parking now and then. And we'll be like, well, the ramp's way over there, but the handicap parking's way over here. When you talked about St. Mark's, and I'm just going to name it, St. Mark's United Methodist, where the parking was for handicap and how it was a solid piece all the way across, right in front of the parking. Tell our listeners a little bit about that and how you suggested changes there.
So the handicap parking was right up against the curb. It went all the way to the curb. So if you were in a wheelchair or a walker or anything like that, you had to get out of the car, go behind the cars, and walk over to where you could get up
The accessible
safely.
ramp had
But
been
you're
put in.
walking. Yeah, yes, the accessible ramp had been put in, but you're walking behind cars. One day when I did that, and I'm short, I came within inches of being hit by a car that was backing out because it couldn't see me clearly. So what I had come up with one suggestion, and it led to some creative thinking. And what ended up happening was the parking lot was huge. So they moved the parking space back by 3 feet. So between the curb and the front of the car is now a 3-foot area that's crosshatched. So you can get out of your cars and walk in front of everything over to the accessible ramp. Those types of things are not, and that was not expensive to do at all.
And nothing that I would think about, because even with my knee replacement, I'm tall. People can usually see me, right? So just those slight differences in things like that.
Yes.
Is there, do you mind sharing, because this gets very personal and deep, maybe something that has happened or been said to you by someone? I'm specifically thinking of the steward or stewardess on that plane, the airline attendant, when you were traveling, how sometimes people speak to people with physical disabilities as if their brains don't work. That's all I can. You had several things. Do you mind sharing anything about that?
Well, I'll share a couple, and Don, I don't quite remember. I mean, I remember the stewardess, but I don't quite remember the words
Okay.
that I would have said at the time because
Yeah.
it was fresh.
Yeah.
But I remember when I've gotten on airplanes before, and I travel a lot and I fly a lot, and every once in a while a stewardess will say, are you sure you can do this? Where's the person caring for you? Oh, how brave you are. Like I'm a little girl.
Yeah. That was the one
And
that I was thinking about, where you were
yeah,
talked to as if you were 5.
yes. And could not understand what she was saying, that I would have trouble comprehending what she was saying.
Right. And
Yeah.
a reminder to everyone, she is a Reverend Doctor. So the brain piece isn't something. She's probably smarter than me. I don't like to say it, but probably is. Eric,
I won't disagree.
see, Eric, you were going to talk about your conversation with Evy the other day and accessibility versus accommodating. Why don't you guys talk?
Yeah, when we have our guests on, we try to meet ahead of time and have a conversation. And Evy and I had met at some point, but not regular communication like you two are. And I just wanted to connect and reintroduce and have a conversation. And in the course of our conversation, what we were going to discuss, she brought up the distinction between accessibility and accommodating. And it was very, very telling to me when she brought that up, when she discussed this hotel she was looking at. And Evy, if you would.
Sure. Yes. So I had been asked to go to a hotel where a meeting was going to happen that several hundred people were going to be at to do an accessibility assessment. And one of the things that I found out was there were no elevators that went to the floor where the meetings were going to happen. No apparent elevators, only escalators. So when I talked to management about that, they said to me, well, you can go around to the back of the building and take the freight elevator up. Anybody that's in a wheelchair or uses a walker or can't do escalators. Wow. Now, that's accommodating. That is not being accessible. That's saying we've got a way to get you there no matter what it feels like.
And I'm sorry that's insulting too.
Yeah.
Ask your guests to go out around behind the back of the building, because spending 12 years in the event and trade show industry, the back ends of building where the freight elevators at are not the most glamorous or glorious plus the fact that you're
Absolutely.
outside, inclement weather potentially, and everything else.
Yeah, yeah, everything else. So, so we had to make people aware of that before they would come. Roughly in conferences where I've done any sort of disability advising, about 10 to 15% of the attendees have some sort of obvious physical disability.
Wow. I hadn't heard that. So that was something that you had discussed with Eric. That is interesting. Yeah.
And the other part of it is like, look, just be honest, right? Don't say
Yeah.
you're accessible if you're really accommodating.
That's right. That's right. And it happens all the time in churches. They say, well, we're accessible, but you can't go down to the fellowship hall.
Right.
Or we're accessible, but if we want you to speak, or if you're going to do a sermon and you can't go up steps to where the pulpit is, then you do it from the floor. But that's okay because you can do it from the floor. And it's those types of things that mean, you know, just say you're accommodating. Not everybody and not everything can be accessible, but you need to be honest about it.
Yeah. And it was at this part when we talked about our church in Lindsay, Donna, and the fact that if you came in the side door, which many of us entered during non-service days,
Yeah. Yeah.
you were up 5 or 6 steps to a landing.
And then down.
Came in the big front door, you came up 3 stairs to the covered tiled terrace area, then up another set of 6 or 7 stairs to a landing, up 3 or 4 stairs to a landing before you got in the doors, and then started a sloped floor back down towards the pulpit.
But
At
when
which
they
point,
did, when
you
they
had
did
to
the
climb.
addition, they did a good job. When they did the addition, they did a really good job of that.
Well, and I
Right.
did tell Evy, you should take a lot of credit for that because I know you were very, very instrumental in
Yeah. Yeah.
engaged and instrumental in that whole redesign.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the things that I have noticed when, from my perspective, when I've been asked to come in and say, you know, tell us what we need to do to be to be accessible, when they need to say to be more accommodating. Maybe they've just built a new addition, or in one case, it was a brand new church. They ask for my advice after they've built it.
Oh, that's right. You had said that.
Makes total sense.
Right, right.
Oh my gosh. You also
It's crazy.
have been a speaker. I remember talking about an ALS convention, and you have said even, you know, times you've been invited to be the speaker, and there's no way to get up to where the microphones are.
Well, that's right. I was one of the major speakers at this meeting of several hundred people, doctors and individuals with ALS and their caregivers and families and practitioners of all sorts. And I go into the room, the main room, and there's no way to get on the stage. I mean, literally no way. They lifted me onto the stage. That really felt good.
Wow. Wow.
And there was probably a round of applause when you got up there, right?
Yes,
The fact that people lifted you up to get you onto the stage.
Yeah, yeah. They thought it was cute, I guess. I don't know.
That was
Yeah,
it. I'm sure they
wow.
did. I'm sure they did. So tell me, or tell us, the listeners, if you had your way and I was a new home builder or whatever, would you feel like someone like yourself or people who represent maybe different categories and different levels of disabilities should be like on every panel with every company before they design things? I mean, is that what would make sense to you?
Well, in reality, I mean, that would be a dream come true. I mean, that would make sense to me. And I think it could be somebody like me that seems to have a broad perspective on multiple levels of physical disability.
Right.
And, you know, like I was co-president of the National Association of Ministers with Disability for several years. And so we learned what the rules were for door widths and for how heavy a door should be, an inner door versus an outer door, and to push open, and what that tension should be, and so on and so forth. And unless unless they have to, builders are going to ignore those things because it's less expensive to ignore them. But what I was saying to Eric was, if some builder, creative builder, decided to build a small community of, let's just say, maybe 100 homes that were accessible, already had bars in them, had countertops that were lower, that somebody could put on to make higher if they wanted to, had no entry doorways, had the doorways wide enough to get wheelchairs through.
Yep.
You wouldn't be surprised at the number of able-bodied people that would want those homes.
Interesting.
Yeah, we related it to people who now gravitate towards gluten-free bread products, not because
Yes.
they have an issue, but because generally they're healthier, right? So
Right.
everybody needs them.
Yeah.
Well, and if you're thinking of aging in place, wouldn't you start out with a home like that? Or if this is going to be if this is your second or third home, let's buy this one. We don't need it now, but we might in the future. And then we don't have to change anything.
Yeah.
Well, and on that point, this coming week, we will have a young contractor out starting to build from our driveway to our front door, a ramp.
Wow.
Because the hand collected limestone rock that I put in for a sidewalk and steps and everything 20 years ago, now that I've had a knee replacement, that my wife Jeannie has had a couple of back surgeries, and we're now have our 83-year-old mother-in-law living in the house with us. The steps down, the unevenness of the limestone no longer makes sense. So we will have a ramp of about 16 foot long that takes us from the driveway down to our front door.
Awesome. Awesome. And some people, I want to make the point that making something accessible doesn't mean it loses in elegance or beauty or anything like that.
Right.
I think my places have all been relatively beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. When our mom was sick, and thinking about the home that we've talked about for years on here, for years, because we've been doing this podcast for 100 years. The 1868, there was nothing about a home built in 1868 that was handicap accessible. And so when mom was in a wheelchair, and we've brought this up in another episode, I think, the men from our church build a ramp, and that ramp had been used for another young man in town who had lost a leg. So they came, and we had people that put it up and did it, and then it was removed again. And it's not even something that even now I would think about when I go back there. I just look at the house and I look at the old steps, and I think that's the way it is. And listeners, Evy has also traveled the world. It isn't like she's never gone anywhere. She's been all over the world, and she even has skydived. The picture on my phone is her skydiving, which is not the best picture ever, but at least it happened, right? And
That's right. That's right.
So you have been in so many places around the world where you have had to adapt. When you talked about Bolivia the other day at our gathering, and you were in Africa just a year or so ago, that you have adapted to what is there as compared to people adapting to you, right?
Right. And I mean, if you're going to travel the world, you've got to know that there are some places that, like, I'm just not going to go,
right?
Because they would just be too physically impossible. Right. But there are thousands of places to go.
Yeah.
And some may have challenges. And I think part of it also, if you're traveling, is your attitude. If I'm with a friend or another group of people and they want to go do some hiking or some walking, I can't do. Believe me, I'm a people person. Put me in a sidewalk cafe with a cup of coffee, and I'll have some of the most wonderful conversations ever while you're off doing that.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like you feel left behind or something. You just
right. In fact, I'm kind of glad they're gone sometimes.
It's like, you go, do you? I'm going to stay here and do me, and
that's right.
Have a coffee and meet the locals.
Yeah.
And those kind of situations, adapting without it almost sounds to me that flight attendant a little bit of condescending.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I want to tell you about one adaptation I did very early in my life. I was 18 years old, and I was going over to Japan as a representative of junior achievement. And so you have to have, I wear a long leg brace on my left leg. So in Japan, you need to take your shoes off and put on the slippers when
Right.
you go, and I'd be living with a family. So I bought 2 pairs of slippers to go over my shoes that were only used inside the house. And then you took those off and put another pair on to go into the bathroom. And they were thrilled and excited that I thought to do that, and that they didn't have to accommodate me by saying, well, yeah, you can walk with your shoes on your brace.
It's okay to take your outside shoes through the house.
Yeah. They didn't have to do that. I had figured out a way to honor their tradition and knowing what I needed to do.
Yeah, that's neat.
Not everyone is that thoughtful. Well,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of you're arrogant Americans. Yes, we've all
Right.
traveled a bit,
Right.
and it's like you Americans
Yep.
think it's all about you. I'm supposed to speak your language. I'm supposed to talk to you. So the fact that you had planned that part ahead at even such a young age is
Yeah. Yes.
had to have been respected and appreciated, especially I will say in the Japanese culture, because
Yeah. Thank you. But I want to get back to America and building and houses. There's no reason that there cannot be more houses, even if it was 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 20, that were designed to be accommodating, at least more accessible, maybe at best. Because complete accessibility really depends on the physical disability.
Right.
So, but there's a lot of things that can be done to say, you're in a wheelchair, we've made sure that the kitchen, you can turn around completely in the kitchen, unobstructively, to the counters, to the refrigerator, to the stove. You can get in the bathroom and close the door in your wheelchair.
yeah. And you just said something about the refrigerator, Evie. How many refrigerators now? We like the side by side French door refrigerators and the sliding drawers down below, but you can't get to the drawers because you have to be out of the way in order to pull the drawers out, and then you can no longer reach what's in them without. In my own house, if I opened it on one side, you may have to go all the way around my island in order to get to the other side to be able to pull something out.
Yeah, and it's like, for me, I really dislike that type of refrigerator. Totally dislike it.
Yeah.
First of all, if you've got the drawers down below and then everything's up on top, if you're short or you're in a wheelchair or you don't have a huge upper arm mobility, you can't hardly reach anything in those things.
Yeah. In your new place, I'm thinking of where the island is and the fridge and everything like that. Where you're living right now, if you were in a wheelchair, would you be able to turn around in that space?
Yes, I could turn around in that space.
Okay.
Yeah, if I was living in a wheelchair, I'd have to reconfigure my living room.
Okay.
But I could turn around in my space in the kitchen.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and I can get in the bathroom and close the door.
And that's another one that I use this. I mentioned I'm a teacher, and just the last class that I was talking about this, I emphasized the point that at the Realtor Academy where I teach, we have accessible bathrooms. They have door openers that you can press the door that's down at a wheelchair height, and extra wide openings, and the door stays open a long time. And I said, how many of you are uncomfortable because you can get into the bathroom faster and the door's still wide open? And just about, I think it was across the board, everybody in the class raised their hand, and it's like, well, get over it. put yourself in this situation and you understand why the doors have to stay open that long.
Yeah.
That's
Because
right. That's
we're
right.
not maneuvering in here if this doesn't allow it. And
So, yeah. Yeah, I was going to say at St. Mark's, Donna, you may not recognize this, but when I was asked to do my work with the trustees on their very first disability assessment, which would have been years ago,
Yeah.
they couldn't see the need for automatic door openers to the restrooms until I had them get in wheelchairs and try to get in the men's restroom and the women's restroom. And then they were like, oh.
eye-opening, yes?
Yeah. You know, that would be a great, thinking of the youth group or something, wouldn't that be a great like activity or exercise for the youth group to find out what that, gosh.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So we're getting down to the wire. We've already talked a little bit about things that you think would be easy to do. You know, the last question that I had here was, what would you like to see for changes and advancements? I loved what you said about just a home builder building maybe 100 homes, all that were, you know, equipped a certain way, or 1 in 10. Is there anything specific that that we haven't touched on that you think would be great for, you know, our gazillions of listeners to hear, Ev?
Gazillion.
Gazillion.
I know.
15, 20.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. The 5,000 that are going to listen to this podcast.
That's
minimally,
it. We are
you know?
going to reach more.
Yeah. 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 I think I guess it's just overall as in, you know, humanity. It's be conscious of your environment and your surroundings, like cutouts in curbs. You know, some places don't see that those are necessary. Sometimes getting to a table in a restaurant is really difficult. Sometimes you can't get where you need to get because people are in the way,
Right?
and won't let you through. I don't know how to say it other than that, but it's like, be aware. People with disabilities are just like everybody else, but sometimes it might take us longer or we're slower. I used to say people walked with me, they got to smell every rose when they walked with me. Now I say they get to smell every petal on every rose.
She has said this to me. She has said this to me when I walk with her. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm fine if you need to walk faster, because some people with long legs, it's really uncomfortable to walk slow.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are just some general statements.
Thank you. Eric, I asked you if you wanted to be the wrapper-upper of this, so why don't you?
The wrapper upper, the bringing it to a conclusion, that we're closing this episode. Evy, number one, thank you before I go into the formal closing, because there is such a level of unawareness. When Donna and I were preparing for this, we were saying, is it intentional or it's accidental? And I think it's a combination of both. Your assessment of accessibility versus accommodating, and just being honest about it. But even that last part there where you talked about a restaurant, and I'm thinking shopping. If you go to certain stores, large box brand stores, you can't even get in and out and around the racks in most circumstances. You can barely do it as a fully capable walking adult getting in and around, let alone if you have to have any kind of accommodation.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, oh, well, someone will be there to help you, because we all know the store clerks are so darned helpful nowadays.
All right. Okay, brother, we got 4 minutes, bud.
All right, close it up. Yes. Well, okay. So thanks everybody for listening. As always, thanks for joining us as we've talked and we've reminisced. And I really think this episode is important. I hope that we can have additional discussions on this, because it can relate to a lot of different things. We talk about houses, we talk about lifestyle, and for if you are handy capable or differently abled, the world's different. and you just look at it differently, and it's eye-opening to hear somebody else's opinion. You may have had an arm, an injury, or something like that that was an inconvenience for a while, and you went right back to your old habits as soon as you had healed. Someone who's doesn't life didn't afford that opportunity to needs some consideration. So thank you again. If you're, as a reminder, if you're in Arizona, Donna's a real estate agent. If you're in San Antonio, Texas, I'm a real estate agent. We can connect you around the world and help you find a perfect home for you to build a wonderful life. Until next time, I'm Eric.
And I'm Donna.
And we are Real Siblings. And Evy's not, but she's somebody's sibling, right?
Maybe.
Bye, y'all.